Vansha had been picking between his teeth with the tip of a sharp twig. Now he tossed it aside and spat into the dust of the trail. Vansha was a master spitter. His spit was thick, globular, and green, and he could hit an ant at 20 paces. "I don't trust that evil meddler Tiny," he snapped. "I've run into him a couple of times, and I've made a habit of doing the opposite of anything he says." Mr. Crepsley nodded. "Generally speaking, I would agree with you. But these are dangerous times, sire, and—" "Larton," the prince interrupted. "It's Vansha. March, or hey, ugly, while we're on the trail. I won't have you grovelling to me." "Very well," Mr. Crepsley grinned. "Ugly?" He grew serious again. "These are dangerous times, Vansha. The future of our race is at stake. Dare we ignore Mr. Tiny's prophecy? If there is hope, we must seize it." Vansha let out a long, unhappy sigh. For hundreds of years, Tiny's let us think we were doomed to lose the war when the Vampaneze Lord arose. Why does he tell us now, after all this time, that it isn't cut and dried, but we can only prevent it if we follow his instructions? The prince scratched the back of his neck and spat into the bush to our left. "It sounds like a load of guano to me." "Maybe Ivana can shed light on the subject," Mr. Crepsley said. "She shares some of Mr. Tiny's powers and can sense the paths of the future. She might be able to confirm or dismiss his predictions." "If so, I'll believe her," Vansha said. "Ivana guards her tongue closely, but when she speaks the truth. If she says our destiny lies on the road, I'll gladly tag along with you. If not—" He shrugged and let the matter rest. Vansha March was weird, and that was putting it mildly. I'd never met anyone like him. He had a code all of his own. As I already knew, he wouldn't eat cooked meat or drink anything but fresh water, milk, and blood, and he made his clothes from the hides of animals he hunted. But I learned much more about him during the 6 nights it took us to reach Lady Ivana's. He followed the old ways of the vampires. Long ago, vampires believed that we were descended from wolves. If we lived good lives and stayed true to our beliefs, we'd become wolves again when we died, and roam the wilds of paradise as spirit creatures of the eternal night. To that end, they lived more like wolves than humans, avoiding civilization except when they had to drink blood, making their own clothes and following the laws of the wild. Vansha wouldn't sleep in a coffin. He said they were too comfortable. He thought a vampire should sleep on open ground, covering himself with no more than his cloak. He respected vampires who used coffins, but had a very low opinion of those who slept in beds. I didn't dare tell him about my preference for hammocks. He had a great interest in dreams, and often ate wild mushrooms that led to vibrant dreams and visions. He believed the future was mapped out in our dreams, and if we learned to understand them, we could control our destinies. He was fascinated by Harkat's nightmares, and spent many long hours discussing them with the little person. The only weapons he used were his shurikens, the throwing stars, which he carved himself from various metals and stones. He thought hand-to-hand combat should be exactly that, fought with one's hands. He had no use for swords, spears, or axes, and refused to touch them. "But how can you fight someone who has a sword?" I asked one evening, as we were getting ready to break camp. "Do you run?" "I run from nothing," he replied sharply. "Here, let me show you." Rubbing his hands together, he stood opposite me and told me to draw my sword. When I hesitated, he slapped my left shoulder and jeered. "Afraid?" "Of course not," I snapped. "I just don't want to hurt you." He laughed out loud. "There's not much fear of..."